Good morning, everyone. We're back for day 2 of our confined to our room celebration of the COVID-19 or whatever it's called these days. There's a lot of things I thought of yesterday that wanted to talk about, and I guess it's like that at the beginning anytime you do this. I'm sure in a week I'll be scratching the walls trying to come up with some ideas of something to talk about or say. But anyway, I thought I'd go again with the Hafiz poem this morning, since he always is such a inspiring voice. This poem is called "The Sun Never Sets." It says that even after all this time, the sun never says to the earth, "You owe me." Look what happens with a love like that. It lights up the whole sky. You know, in this poem, really, the reason I like it is it really takes care of the problem of service. How to avoid that religiosity or that smugness that comes. When you get your life kind of going along and you're being a nice guy and you're doing things for folks and moving along, and then you start becoming egotistically connected to how great you are or your profound effect on the planet. And the problem with service as it's traditionally practiced, where you as somebody who has an advantage or has something then goes and serves somebody who doesn't. And the problem with that is twofold. One, that you observe yourself as being the helper, and two, they're in kind of a position of having to receive. And in those relationships over time, what happens is that imbalance creates a resentment on the part of the receiver and a smugness or an entitled sense to the person who's doing the serving. And so what do we do about that? Hafiz is saying that even after all this time, the sun has never said to the earth, "You owe me." So there's not that kind of relationship between the giver and the receiver, that there's some sort of debt being incurred because you're being helped. There's a great book, and actually it's a path to knowing the truth, called Karma Yoga. It's the path of action. And one of the great teachings of Swami Vivekananda, who kind of organized and put together that particular book, the Karma Yoga book. Karma Yoga has been around for eons, immeasurable. But the whole idea in this Karma Yoga to avoid these pitfalls of service is this notion of oneness. Where you realize that you are not the body, because all the bodies are different, that you're not the mind, because it's constantly changing along with the body. Its demands and desires are constantly shifting. And in that shifting, there's still a steady sense of I. When you say, "I'm hungry" or I'm thirsty, you're always talking about the same I, even though you can't possibly be talking about the same body. It has changed immeasurably and innumerable times since you started inhabiting it as a baby. It's probably 4 or 5 times the size that it once was, hopefully in a good way. It's changed a number of times, and yet you've always identified yourself with it. And notice the way we talk about those selves, those things. Identify yourself with something else. So there's an I in you that has never changed. It's the I that was looking out of your eyes when you were 5, and it's the I that is listening to your ears and looking at your thoughts, watching your mind. And that I is the same in all of us. It is the nature of the beloved. In Sanskrit, they call it Sat Chit Ananda, which means existence. It exists. It is existence itself. Chit, mind or knowledge, intelligence, and Ananda, bliss or love. And so our nature, the nature of that part of you which is unchanging, which has been consistent through your whole life, that self is the real you. And the reason we, in the 60s especially, everybody went off on these great excursions to find out, who am I? What am I? And as a body-mind, as a person deeply identified with body-mind, that seems silly, because this seems very clear. Oh, I'm a man, I'm 55, and this is who I am. But to the person who begins to suspect that there's something more going on than the obvious, or the seemingly obvious, there's this self inside that runs the body, watches the mind, kind of keeps track of all of it. It's the same self that in a dream inhabits a completely different body, a dream body of some kind, and inhabits another reality, which is just as seemingly real, touchable, and experienceable as this reality is. And when you begin to wonder about those things, you begin to see that what seems obvious is not so obvious. That there is something more, that there is something deeper. And that relationship of knowing what that is, that search, that quest for the knowledge of my true identity, is simultaneously the search for freedom, it's simultaneously the search for happiness, it's simultaneously the search for meaning, for purpose, for value, for beauty, for inspiration. All of those things come from the same notion, that same self, that image of the beloved stamped deeply within the heart of all living and even non-living things, but that's another discussion at some time to have. So this Satchitananda, by identifying with it and by knowing that self, its nature, that it is love, it is intelligence, it is existence, when you begin to identify with that and know that because it's love, it's things of love that bring it joy. It's the manifestation of love that bring it fulfillment. It's the observance and understanding of love that bring it enrichment in the world, that makes this life experience meaningful. Because at the material level, this life does not have meaning. If you are a thinker, if you're not a thinker, if you just kind of blithely go through life without contemplating things, then you eat, sleep, and die, and that's that. And finding joy in that being enough is actually a wonderful spiritual practice in itself. But it's not the whole story, thank goodness. What Hafiz is pointing to here is this oneness that when you serve yourself in others, who is the greater and who is the lesser? Who's the giver and the receiver? There's a great saint from Bombay named Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, which many people have heard me talk about before. I like him because he was a cigarette maker and he was a realized soul at the same time, which I think is just beautiful, just really interesting. And one of his teachings, was that when an ordinary person, he says, sees someone in need, someone is suffering, we tend to see from the outside in. Why? Because we see ourselves from the outside in. When we think of ourselves, we actually think of ourselves from outside. What do I look like? When we describe ourselves, we think about the things that we do and the things that we like and the things that please us and bring us pleasure. So we see the world from the outside in, interestingly enough. So think about that, actually. See if that's true for you. And let me know any way you want, or not. And see what you can find out. But he says that a realized soul, a person who knows the identity of who they are, who has seen clearly the distinguishing features of mind and body and the self, that person, when he sees someone suffering, he doesn't actually see someone suffering like we do. He doesn't see from the outside in. He sees, I see from the inside out, which means when I see suffering, I suffer, because I know the same self in me is the same self in the sufferer, and that it is me suffering, and it is my nature to alleviate suffering. It is my nature to help, my nature to give. And so you're set free at that level. And that unevenness that's associated with service dissipates. You can actually sit next to the person you're serving in that sense. And the act itself becomes worship, because you're worshiping the beloved that you now know and see clearly in yourself and in the other person. And by doing what is natural to that self, which is to manifest love, to alleviate suffering, it's an opportunity of worship for you, an opportunity for you to be and to manifest what you are, which will bring you the greatest joy and the greatest experience of life, because it's in harmony with what you are and who you are. And so, try that. When you look at somebody, when you look in their eyes, try to see that self looking back. Have that knowledge of who is looking out of your eyes. And when you look into their eyes, try and see that same self. Because that self is actually the reason that we love anyone or anything. It's the reason that we are able to be loved by anyone or anything. And so explore the nature of that lover in you today. Think about your difference from body and mind. Think about how you identify yourself. Think about when somebody asks how you are, who do you query to find out? Do you query the mind? Oh, I'm in a good mood, I'm in a bad mood, I'm depressed, I'm angry, I'm jealous. Do you query the body? Oh, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I hurt, I'm getting old. Or do you have a sense of that timeless self inside? Swami Prabhupada, who is one of my great teachers and one of my favorite people to reference, I learned so much from him, told me, used to start saying at the end of his life, he died of lung cancer actually, just a few years ago, and he was a very loved Swami, and many people constantly would, oh Maharaj, how are you? Oh Maharaj, how are you? Oh, how are you today? How are you today? And after a while he just would smile and he'd say, oh, like this. Which is just an all-encompassing perfect answer, that's easily repeated and deeply meaningful. Oh, like this. So know and identify with that self. That way it will set you free. When you're looking through a depressed mind, or when you're looking through an angry mind, or when you're looking through a jealous mind, just knowing that it's not you gives you a lot of options that are not available to you when you're identified with it. So one shouldn't say, I'm depressed. One shouldn't say, I'm angry. One shouldn't say, I'm lonely. Those are all conditions of mind. One shouldn't say, I hurt, I'm sick, I'm in pain, or whatever. Those are conditions of body. You can say, my body hurts. You can say, my mind is depressed, or my mind is lonely. But that self inside can only have three things said about it. That self inside is loving. That self inside is intelligent. And that self inside is existence. So hold on to those thoughts today, empower yourself with them, and use them to worship everything, to worship the beloved that you're beginning to recognize in the world around you. And by doing that, this life will become great indeed. By doing that, we'll finally learn how to love and how to be loved, how to be free, and how to live a life that really is the way it is intended to be lived, with love, with graciousness, with kindness, with service, with fullness and contentment, with fearlessness and freedom. May we all be blessed today. May we all make our best efforts and give the rest to love.